Reasons to be cheerful. 1, 2, 3.
Hello lovelies, it's comments time again. Housekeeping. A new Eritech Gazetteer is somewhat imminent. I am working on the maps and filling out some additional material. These don't sell hugely well. The number of people willing to openly buy anything even slightly naughty is reduced, but it's a good way of kind of keeping track of what goes on, what's been explored or what could be explored in the tabletopless games. And for those of you who are into them, gives a little sort of glance behind the scenes and so on. The other thing I've been working on and off again is Ronin, which is my retro mutant of Bushido. There's two modes of play. There's a more sort of historical mode of play, and there's a more magical, mystical monsters side of play. The rules for the more historical side are all complete, and T-Shirted Historian is working on some background cultural material and so on, because he's a weeb. And I have a massive list of traditional Japanese monsters, creatures, yokai and so on, and I'm currently scouring Japanese horror games, particularly historical ones, for things in a similar sort of vein, but not necessarily fully traditional, because a lot of traditional stuff isn't particularly great sword fodder for adventurers. But if you've got any tips or games I should check out, let me know. Same for magical spells. I need to make sure that the spells that I write for the game have the appropriate flavour. I have my own ideas, of course, but by crowdsourcing I can get some other perspectives on this sort of thing. I got a gift package from Alex T of a whole bunch of his games, so at some point soon you can expect a string of reviews of Alex T games, and some of those I might do some solo gaming for. I've also started the third and probably final Thousand Dead Worlds playthrough, though I might continue if there's taste for it for doing these sorts of things. Might split them into episodes from now on, we'll see. But I landed on a planet this time, so something a bit different. I think the way that I enjoy single player RPGs is by playing them in the headspace of a games master. Right, because that's what I like to do when I play games. I like to be the GM. So if I approach it more from a games master's point of view, I think it's good. It works like that. I also think solo RPGing is perhaps good practice, good training for games masters, but that doesn't seem to be something that a lot of people have really picked up on. So worth thinking about there. I have a few other books as well that have come in, so yeah, there will be reviews. There are always reviews. Never mind playing all my games, I can't catch up to reviewing all my games. A bunch of Kickstarters have also started to come in, so that's more stuff to review, and I need to stop backing so many Kickstarters, especially of things I'm probably not going to play. I would remind everyone that despite all this flurry of activity, I'm supposed to be kind of on a break for the sake of my health, and I am trying, but it's difficult. But that's why the output, except here on YouTube, is a bit lower than it might otherwise be. So this episode of Comments is going to be a bit of a comment special. When I made my videos on the latest wheelchair kerfuffle, which seems to have sprung forth fully formed like Athena, from the forehead of Daggerheart, things were different. There was a lot more positive feedback. There was a lot more support. Something is in the air. Something feels different right now. And I was humbled by some of the responses that people left and the solidarity that a lot of people showed for my position. People seem more willing to stick their head over the parapet and say stuff now. So I think that's good. So there won't be as many comments this time around, and almost all of them are addressing this subject, but I felt like as a minority of a minority, though I don't think we're actually the minority of a minority, but as a minority of a minority voice, I think people whose experiences and so on relate to the topic deserve to have their voices heard, especially since they keep being talked over by others within the space who think they're doing something good. So, Kev O'Reilly says, my sister had spina bifida, ultimately leading to her early death. And I think what she would have said is important in these situations. And I'm wholly certain her response would have been, "Oh, fuck off." That's definitely a sentiment other people have expressed who are either disabled, have relatives who are disabled, or who care for disabled people. Nathan Coley says in the comments under that, I also have spina bifida. I'm sorry for your loss. I have the same attitude with these so-called activists. Oh, fuck all the way off. So, as you see, you're not alone. Productions, or Triple M Productions, or MMM Productions, one of those, says, the most annoying thing is when you challenge them on this, as a person with a disability, and they deflect with accusations of internalized ableism. I used to use the term internalized ableism as a joke, but yes, I've run into that as well, especially lately around this. Our good friend Victor Gorchev, who does sort of modern OSR material, and whom you can see on the A Week in Geek tonight, maybe, or possibly on Tuesday, for Tuesday with Geeks. Victor says, as a legally disabled Dutchman with literal brain damage, I concur. A legally disabled Dutchman with brain damage, but you repeat yourself, so. True Believer OSG says, only 200 gold pieces for the chair, with a max of 1,650 gold pieces and upgrades. That's less than 2,000 gold pieces. Ludicrous. It would cost tens of thousands of gold pieces for a magic item that did all that. Hell, that chair is so awesome, all adventurers will want one. Well, that's assuming also that you're playing D&D, right? And you're playing a high magic game of D&D. Basically, that you're playing Forgotten Realms or Eberron. Eberron is the one setting where perhaps the device as listed would make sense. But most people aren't. Having raised money for someone's wheelchair in real life, one that is genuinely just really a chair with wheels, is hideously expensive. There's a lot more that goes into it than people might think, and that's in a world without magic. Motorized wheelchairs, even more expensive. Specialized wheelchairs used for sport or off-road wheelchairing, or whatever you call it, even more expensive. It's just kind of silly, right? And that's the problem, isn't it? Tora58 says, I have cerebral palsy. I was told 40 years ago I'd be in a wheelchair by now. I struggle every day to stay out of a wheelchair, literally. My mom cried for days when I told her I'd rather, redacted because of YouTube, than lose what mobility I do have. This hobby is the one thing where I can be normal, where my disability does not inhibit me in the slightest. I find the existence of combat wheelchairs to be insanely dehumanizing and offensive. Thank you for posting this. I'm going to send it to a bunch of well-meaning white liberals who can't seem to grasp that they're being insensitive. This is a sentiment that was also expressed by a lot of people privately, whose comments I won't replicate because they were very, very personal. But yeah, for a lot of people, they want to escape. They want to imagine, or they want to remember what it was like to be more able-bodied, and role-playing games can provide an outlet for that. Firetouch says, my wife is also disabled and has therefore asked me not to use any of this material in our campaign. She said a few years ago when the wheelchair appeared in D&D/Pathfinder that she found it inappropriate. In our hobby, in my opinion, disabilities become an accessory. Like you said in other videos, do not buy, use or support this crap. I think there's a misunderstanding in some people. Like, disability in games is fine, but it should be a disability, not, as you say, an accessory or an aesthetic. It's not a hat to put on. If you want to play a disabled character, you should have to deal with being disabled. Someone left a very long comment that I haven't read here about playing a character who just couldn't run. Basically, I had to walk with a cane, and how not being able to retreat quickly or to escape from difficult situations helped drive the roleplay. Whereas if you do away with that problem existing in any meaningful sense, you lose the point of it, you lose the roleplay of it, you are not experiencing being the other, having the disability. So on a whole bunch of different levels, things like the combat wheelchair or the assorted prosthetics that seem to be being suggested in Daggerheart, you know, they just missed the entire point. Right? Jack Fetch says, I've no objection to someone playing a disabled character if they really wanted to, but I do object to something that turns the character into fricking Iron Man. Yeah, unless you're playing a superhero game, of course, in which case Professor X's hover wheelchair or, you know, fricking Iron Man make more sense. Samantha Lacroix says, I am disabled from a horrific automobile accident nobody should have survived, according to all the first responders, to include a state trooper with over 30 years of experience. My neck and back are thoroughly and utterly shot out. Pain has been my constant companion for over 20 years. I still have functionality and control, most of the time, of all my limbs. That being said, there was a period of years I could not walk a store and required a motorized cart in order to buy groceries or clothes. I was unable to go and do so many things before I started a series of procedures that now have to be done 4 times a year forever, and I'm still limited in what I can do. This is some grade A government-inspected bullshit that has to stop. It makes a mockery out of what I and millions of others have gone through. Oh, it's okay, this artifact makes it all better. There is no magic pill, or I would have sold every bloody thing I own, could borrow or steal to get it. It eliminates the entire concept of overcoming. Do you know how much pride I take from doing the simple things? The sheer joy of accomplishing against the pain and limitations? No, just make it cool and fun to play. WTF. And if you disagree, you get crapped on. Forget the fact that you are playing a game. Said game has magic technology that could fix you. Nobody makes a tomb with handicap accessibility. Caves don't come with government-mandated openings, hallways or ramps. Going through the woods in a wheelchair is impossible. I could go on and on and on. As someone whose life for the past 20 plus years was and always will be lived with challenges, the level of anger I have at this is beyond words. If you know, you know. If you do not know, I truly hope you never do. Yeah, just like tidying one corner of my room is an accomplishment for me, and I think voices like yours need to be heard in this discussion. Jeff Slater says, I have severe treatment-resistant MDD and regular GAD. I completely agree with you. At times in my life, I've been able to function, and at other times I've been bedridden for years. Anyone with severe depression would rather have a limb removed than experience 6 months of severe depression. This is not hyperbole. At times in my life... Oh no, I said that, didn't I? Extreme depression is literally hell. The idea that someone would not want to be cured of it is a guarantee they've never experienced it. The people who push this stuff conflate being moral with believing the right thing rather than doing the right thing. They're completely blind and cannot fathom the fact that their belief system might actually do harm. They assume they are 100% compassionate, and those who have different belief systems are one of the evil isms. They cheapen suffering and make it into a fad and a fetish in order to demonstrate to themselves and others that they are the good guys. It's sad, and their ridicule and demonizing of others shows a lack of compassion. I think many of them have some growing up to do. Yeah, and they will instantly shut down anyone that disagrees with them, even if they are disabled or have, various other problems or issues. They weaponize other people's disabilities, or in a few cases their own, while ignoring a whole bunch of other people with disabilities. Stanley Barnes says, I have BPD and ultra-rapid cycling bipolar, and I agree with you. Jim, they should play the way they want to at their own tables, but afford us the same courtesy. Yeah, this is the other defense that they seem to make, isn't that, this is all optional, right? But every book contains it. Every adventure seems to have the diversity box ticked. If you're playing a game at a convention and for some reason you have open characters and you try to deny someone with a character in a wheelchair, there would be a stink. Same at a shop, same at a club, right? Force doesn't have to be like gun to your head force. I mean, there were people in the discussions around this literally threatening people with cancellation just for being a dungeon master who said no. Right? Not even for being a media figure or a social media figure or whatever else. There are many ways in which force and threat can manifest, and there are also many ways that things can be normalized. And normalization isn't always good. Schmage says, as a full-time carer for a family member with severe back and shoulder disabilities, I will die on this hill. I don't care if it's a magical wheelchair. I don't care if it is a fantasy setting with magic. The idea that people ought to have disabilities and a battle wheelchair and go off to slay dragons is fucking insane. It shows no understanding of what these disabilities are like and what living with such actually means. Cancel me now, because it will never happen in any game I run. Amen. Rudest Hazard says, yeah, agree, Grim. I'm disabled too, mentally and physically, and it's hilarious to be told, mostly by healthy lib white women or white men, trying to farm those good boy points, that they don't know, that they know what's better for me than I do. It's also patronising. I'm so tired of it. I'm beginning to think nerd stuff never really became popular because it's only enjoyed aesthetically by these people. The moment you want narrative consistency or want a fantasy world that's actually immersive, then you're the problem to them. They want a shallow theme park ride, and if you don't want that, well, you're in the way. Might as well still be shoving us in lockers. Yeah, there's no ambition to create a consistent world or to up their game, right? To my mind, there's a lot of different ways to have fun, and some of us want to take these games and these worlds seriously and get more involved in them, even if we break the ice or cut the tension with out of character jokes. You know, the in character game, maybe we're aiming for something more. Maybe we're trying to get that immersion. It doesn't have to be kid stuff. And in fact, things like role-playing games, I think, are ways of extending imaginative play into adulthood. You know, I remember the very last time I went outside and played war with my friends before they decided that they were all too mature for that. And to a degree, games were a license to keep going with that kind of imaginative play. But, you know, there's no harm in taking it seriously. That can be fun too. Right? It doesn't have to be Monty Python jokes and adolescent wish fulfillment. Right? They're just so unambitious. It's so depressing. Jay Sophia says, as a depressed blind person, I agree with you. I think it's important to understand the idea that some of us play to escape our struggles and others play to remember and process. What the activists propose is the worst of both worlds. Yeah, the denial of escapism, the denial that as a disabled person you might disagree with them. It's it's harsh. Wardog Madness says, my partner of 11 years, she has a list of disabilities. She is a wheelchair user. She never once wanted to play as a disabled PC. One of her many PCs broke their back falling into a pit. She damn near had a breakdown, so she crawled back to the cleric at the chapel to heal herself. She was so happy. She let slip out loud, I wish I could do that in real life. Disabilities are not a choice. They're a life-changing situation. Now, there were some negative comments from some cunt under that comment, saying, well, you should never have allowed that to happen to them. It's obvious that a person who's disabled would react badly to their character having their back broken, which is a perfect demonstration of the difference between compassion and empathy, right? Because empathy would say, oh, this is going to hurt you, therefore we should cut it out. Whereas compassion is treating the player like any other player and letting the dice fall where they may, and what happens. And role-playing games, the table is a safe environment to experience the kinds of things that might trigger you. Now, the Games Master, or Dungeon Master if you prefer, is not your therapist. So, you know, they shouldn't be performing exposure therapy, but they also shouldn't be coddling you, because that is counterproductive. It is more compassionate to allow someone to run into these things that might trigger or upset them in a safe environment, to allow them to build up tolerance, right? Because without doing that, these feelings entrench themselves and become stronger and worse. This is well known. So the negative comments missed the point under there, I think. Yagsipik says, imagine being in a wheelchair and they had you playing a character in a wheelchair to make you feel better. Like, come on, no. A light drizzle. Now I can't move on 98% of all roads as they're all dirt. Oh no, magic that can bring people back to life. Can't fix my legs or back. Oh well, guess I'm still me in a fantasy world. Yeah, there's the inconsistency. Oh, wheelchairs are unrealistic, but there's magic. Well, okay, magic could heal you, so you wouldn't need a wheelchair. But, consistency. Consistency is for custard, apparently. Muckbuzz says, preach it, Brother Grimm. I kind of wonder if the self-appointed champions of the disadvantaged are not expressing some sort of weird fetish. I have a partially disabled left eye caused by a delivery mishap at birth. I just live around it. I certainly don't feel any need to roleplay it into my characters. I really don't need some self-appointed saviour giving me representation by forcing it to be the identifier of who I am. Again, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with playing disabled characters. It's just, if you're going to have disabilities in your game, have disabilities in your game. Drawbacks. problems, increased difficulty on rolls. Like, okay, if you're missing an eye, your depth perception's off, -2 penalty to ranged attacks, or whatever the case might be, right? Have it mean something in the game, both in terms of mechanics and in roleplay and the synergy between the two. I'm kind of curious what Indestructo Boy thinks of this stuff, and what he's willing to say about it publicly or privately. Maybe I'll hit him up, see if he wants to have another discussion or debate about it, if we're on opposite sides of it, because people rag on him, but I think he's basically a good dude, having got to know him a bit. Not much, but a bit. Dracaballs corrects me, it's Bowdlerized, not Boulderized. Yes, I know that. I always get it wrong, even though I know it, but thank you for the correction. Bowdlerized, just it's harder to say for some reason. I think that's why I revert all the time. Kevin Video says, it sucks being disabled. While the parking's nice, needing a cane to move and get up from a sitting position, and a ridiculous amount of pills just to get through the day despite it destroying your liver in the process, just doesn't balance things. And I don't even get the special parking. Even if you're disabled, these people typically don't care unless you're echoing their sentiments. I've seen numerous posts saying that those of us who are disabled are in the minority, that we don't speak for those who want to see disabilities in TTRPGs, even if it doesn't fit the setting, that we've lost our empathy for our fellow disabled, and that we need to stay silent because representation needs to happen, and any discourse will put the movement back 100 years. If you're not disabled, you get no voice whatsoever. If you are disabled, you need to get in line, otherwise you're an internalized ableist. Which is basically the same thing as all the women being called internalized misogynists, and need to go sit in a corner. It's maddening. I think my favourite argument so far is, if you don't allow wheelchairs, mechanical spider leg chairs, e.g. from Wild Wild West, Professor Xavier's hover chair, or other alternatives in your game, not only do you apparently lack imagination, but you're somehow also not allowed to have wheelbarrows or carts in your game either. Also, if dragons can exist, wheelchairs that ignore difficult terrain, large gaps, and don't hinder mobility and ability can too. Also, they seem to enjoy using Joe from Family Guy as their main example for what can be done in a wheelchair. Yeah, it's like they just don't take any of these thoughts far enough. There's that meme, isn't there? You've got dragons in your game, but you can't allow a Honda Accord or whatever it is in your game. What's wrong with you? Lack of imagination. Yeah, that kind of makes the point, I think. Even fantasy worlds, or the best fantasy worlds, have rules. Even magic has rules. It has internal consistency. It has a degree of plausibility. There's a way that it works in the world that follows some sort of logical basis, right? And they just want to ignore all of that to force what they want in. To end, J. Scott Garibay left a comment, and I prefer to engage with Mr. Garibay in good faith. I think people are quite aware that there are other games, because I mentioned that everyone seems stuck on D&D, right? What we now know, based on a ton of evidence in 2023, is there are no other games that matter. D&D is the conversation, the whole of it. The OSR and Indie insist they have, but they really have not earned with work, legacy, or momentum a place in the conversation, in my humble opinion. D&D is the entire conversation now, and the OSR and Indies need to take any action that is not a copy action to be included in the conversation at all. Thank you for the video. Well, you're welcome. D&D is not the whole conversation, but it does dominate the space, and that is part of the problem here with relation to this topic. Because D&D is so dominant, people apply their D&D thinking across all games. But as I said earlier, not all games are D&D, and not even all D&D games are, 2024 Forgotten Realms or Rifts Light, as I called it, which upset someone. It's not Ed's fault, right? It's the people that came after. But yeah, I think you have to recognise that there are other things, right? It's like saying reality TV is all of TV. It might be very popular, it might dominate, but that doesn't mean it's the only thing. There are still people who like opera, right, or go to the theatre, or would rather watch something else, and so it is with role-playing games. D&D certainly dominates, leads the conversation, but it hasn't always. At the fag end of second edition, Storyteller was outselling it. During the 4th edition period, Pathfinder was outselling it. With this new edition coming in and the deflating popularity with D&D, there's a possibility that something might outstrip it again. It's not the whole conversation, certainly not while it's being mismanaged. And I think a lot of the OSR is carrying forward the legacy. One need only look at the way that Gary Gygax has been erased, right? Or Dave Arneson has been erased, or more recently Jim Ward has been erased, to see that the current custodians of D&D don't have the right amount of respect for the founders. Now, my view is slightly twisted because I didn't start with D&D. Right? The British RPG scene has always been a bit more open, polyamorous in terms of its game choices and what people play. And to take one very British example, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay has always had critical wounds and people with peg legs and bladed stumps and whatever. That incorporates disability into a game in a meaningful way, because you lose some stuff on some stats. But these are a way of showing the horrors and so on that you've faced. So sure, D&D dominates the conversation, but it is not the only game in town. There are others. And what happens in D&D does spread and infect other games. I would love to see D&D go back to its creative heyday rather than its financial heyday. And I would much rather see a more mature attitude and, weirdly, actually, a more diverse attitude on display throughout the game. Zang.
Aren't you a little tired of so-called horror media about shiny, sparkly, angsty, whiny monsters? I know I am, and that's why I created Actual Fucking Monsters, where you will play an actual fucking monster doing horrible and monstrous things and being tracked down and killed for it. Buy now at DriveThruRPG, post-mort.com or lulu.com.
Get used to disappointment.